Okay, so my talk is titled Atheism Explained and Exposed. So we're going to look at two sides of various coins pertaining to atheism. And when I refer to atheism, it's really, I'm using one of the various terms that I could use. And I'm thinking about its importance in culture and the world, really. Generally not even going under the name of atheism, but more as sort of generalized secularism. For instance, the sort of education you get all the way through elementary school, all the way through, I guess here they call it mid-school. When I went to school, it was junior high. High school, college, it's really being taught a form of what I call the atheist catechism. And somebody had just mentioned that our kids aren't being taught how to think. You're right. They are being taught what to think, which makes it even worse. Okay, and so that's kind of the effect you get. People graduating college thinking, well, now I've learned everything about history and science and politics and mathematics and you name it. And well, God obviously had nothing to do with any of it. So that's the mindset you just naturally come out with. And so my point is just how influential atheism is, even under any other name. And so this talk is just very much of a bottom line of how to sort of get beyond all the fluff and puff and all the arguments and really get at the core of the issues of truth, morality, the problem of evil, science, and then atheism itself, and kind of expose and explain each one of those. So beginning with truth. Generally, you'll get a lot of discussions about, well, what is the definition of truth to start with? Because I hear a lot of people referring to my truth, right? This is my truth. And well, if it's your truth, then how can I challenge you? Because you're placing that sort of definition, that authority upon yourself. And well, now all of a sudden my truth could differ from yours and yours and yours, and we each have our own individual truths. Well, is that even truth anymore then? What is the definition of truth if we all get to invent our own? And so that's sort of the pop level definition, is that truth is relative. It's what I think at any given moment, by the way. But the most basic, useful definition of truth is known as the correspondence theory of truth, and it just basically says truth is whatever accords to reality. Okay, that's just a basic starting point. If it conforms to reality, if it describes reality, then it is true by definition. And some, especially us, would say that things such as that all truth is God's truth, right? Because if it's true, then it has an author, a truth author. Now, sometimes I hear my children say to each other, oh, you lied. You lied. And now I got to get in on this one. Oh, well, what's the situation? Inevitably, well, they lied because what they said wasn't true. And I said, well, but how do you know they lied? Because what they said wasn't true. Yeah, but how do you know they're lying? Maybe they're just wrong. Okay, that's just there's a logical way of looking at it and an ethical way. So a lie is if I know what I'm saying is not true, but I'm portraying it as if it is true. Okay, that's different. That's a different motivation. That's ethics. Whereas if I'm just saying something that I think is true, but it just so happens I'm wrong, that's no longer unethical, so I'm not lying. I'm just wrong. So that's just different ways of thinking about truth. What is truth and how do we handle getting into discussions about it? So that the correspondence theory of truth would tell me that truth is absolute. Okay, and absolute means that something is that which it is regardless. Whether you like it or not, whether you prefer it to be different or not, even whether you're aware of it or not, it is that which it is, regardless. That's what it is. And so, are things based on my truth? Now, let's say There was a time in history when people thought the earth was a cube. Let's just invent that because I don't want to get into the flat earth issue. Was that their truth? Well, it couldn't have been their truth because it wasn't true. Now, you could say it was something they believed, they firmly held to, they had conviction, and you could use a ton of different words, but it was not their truth because it was not true. It's really that simple. And so one important thing to note about truth, true truth, rather than fake truth, is that it is knowable. Obviously, it is knowable. Now, an atheist named Matt Dillahunty said, "I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible." He liked that so much, he had it put on a t-shirt. Now, my first question to Matt, coming from an atheist perspective as he does, my first issue wouldn't be, well, let's discuss the definition of truth. Okay, that would be kind of up here, but as I said, my point is to get underneath it all, to the premise, not to what he's building upon the premise. Because see, the issue is, if you start picking leaves or fruits off a tree, it actually makes the tree more fertile and it keeps growing. So, well, I got to get down into the roots. I got to get down into the ground and see what's going on there and attack the ground if I want to get rid of the tree. And so if a point of view is like a tree, then I need to get it inside of there. I need to get deep down into the bottom line of it and not all these peripheral issues. So what I would ask Matt is, well, you want to believe as many true things? Why? That'd be my first question. Why? And actually he answers that. I want to believe as many. Okay. Well, then my next question, well, why do you want to? Right? So that's like the bottom line. Why is that something that you desire as an atheist? To know as many true things as possible. And I'll get back to that in a second. Note that in 1881, Charles Darwin wrote the following to William Graham. "The horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which have been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Why would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind, if there are any convictions in such a mind?" And you see the problem, if your point of view as an atheist or evolutionist is that our brains or minds, and that would be an interesting issue to discuss, is the dichotomy there, but if our brains develop due to just haphazard, chance, random accidents, mutations, yeah, why conclude that they're sort of the ultimate in discerning reality? Basically, our thoughts on that view are interpretations of random chemicals, bioneural reactions, and we call those thoughts and we call those opinions, and then by golly, I'm going to have an argument with you because my random chemical reactions differ from yours, and mine are right and yours are wrong. Okay, you might as well be go to the zoo and argue with an ape that it's not ooh, it's ooh, I mean, it's the same thing. If that's your view of where the brain came from. And a lot of people have picked up on this concept of these sort of haphazardly evolved brains. How could they be trusted to provide us with accurate feedback? C.S. Lewis picked up on it. More recently, Alvin Plantinga. So the question would be, if my view is that nothing caused nothing to explode for no reason and made everything without meaning, does truth come out of that explosion? I mean, here's the Big Bang, and certain basic chemicals start to form, and hey, there goes truth, you know. And for that matter, ooh, there go the laws of logic. I mean, is that part of what philosophers call the furniture of the universe? Because if you're looking at the brain in that, through that worldview, then really the brain evolved for whatever reason, unknown reason. for survival, primarily. Not necessarily to ascertain empirical truth. For whatever reason, life seeks survival. And we don't know why. I mean, we know why, but they don't know why. But it would have to be an accident. It would have to be an accidental mutation that sort of just caused that to happen in biology. And whoa, thank nothing that it did happen, because or else we would have been stuck at the very first step. Right now. So the point is, ascertaining empirical truth would certainly help you survive. But you could also be completely deluded, and as long as you survive, nature doesn't care. If we can say nature cares about anything, it cares about survival. It doesn't necessarily care if you're right or not, if you're corresponding with truth or not. And I distinctly remember when we had one of those huge tsunamis hit a country, that a news report talked about very primitive villagers who survived it because one of the tribesmen said, let's move inland because the sea hasn't taken anybody for a while and it's hungry. Okay, that's deluded, that's preposterous, that has no conformity with reality. But who cares? They survived. Because of a deluded belief, they actually survived. So that's what really matters. Not whether he was technically accurate or not. And so atheists would tell me that theism, for example, developed as a Darwinian survival mechanism. They have no evidence for that, but that's the claim. Now the fact is that the overwhelming majority of humanity, regardless of chronology, geography, theology, or lack thereof, have been theists. The overwhelming majority. So this would prove that theism is the most successful Darwinian survival mechanism. And now, since most theists are Christians, then there you have a good evolutionary argument for why atheists should convert to Christianity. And so, this is kind of the, like I said, this is the bare bones bottom lines of what are all these discussions about. And if you get underneath it all, you see that there's really no foundation there. Because when you start with nothing causing nothing to explode, you don't have much of a foundation for anything, including prerequisites for even using logic. Now, since we're discussing truth, the Old Testament refers to truth 127 times and the New Testament 110 times, with the bottom line there being that in John 14, Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. So, in the Judeo-Christian worldview, truth not only is, but it is knowable. It is knowing truth is an imperative, okay, meaning it's something that one must do. And truth actually personified in the person of Jesus. So that what we have is our worldview saying that, and the atheist worldview saying, if there even is truth, well, you can ascertain it. I mean, it could certainly help you in certain things, but you don't have to. It's optional, really, and you can survive fine without it. See, so there's the two worldviews right there. So that's truth. Let's move on to the issue of morality. And Jeremiah 31, which is reiterated in Hebrews 8, states, I will put my laws in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. And Romans 2 talks about the Gentiles who show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts, the meanwhile, accusing or else excusing one another. So the atheist criticism is, if God put his law in our hearts, well, then how come there's moral disagreement? Right, throughout time, from culture to culture, total moral chaos and disagreement. Now, why is that, if God really did this? one very simple reason is, well, look, murder is illegal. That doesn't keep people from murdering, right? And so having a law within us doesn't necessarily mean we're going to adhere to it, right? So if the claim is, why so much moral disagreement? That doesn't prove there is no law within us. It just means people can break it and do break it. But what I want to point out is the difference between morality and ethics. And this is just on a technical level, okay? Technically, morality refers to the mores, and that's just a description of whatever people happen to be doing. That's the morality. So by technical definition, morality is subjective, it's tentative, it's intrinsic, it's relative, as opposed to ethics, because that refers to the ethos. Okay, and that's the prescriptions of what people should be doing. And so ethics is what is absolute, it's extrinsic, and that's the difference, is one describes, one prescribes. But again, this is just technical, because there are people who will use my definition of ethics, but they'll call it universal morals or absolute morals. So I'm not saying to get stuck on terms. I'm saying think about the definitions. When you have these discussions, say, well, when you say this, what do you mean? When we talk about morality, what are you talking about? In fact, I had a whole debate with an atheist at Wilfrid Laurier University on the issue of morals, and I used the word moral because I didn't want to sideline the debate into one about semantics. But I did something he didn't do. At the beginning of my presentation, I defined, here's what I mean when I say morals. And so you see that when you're thinking about these conflicts, you want to think about the moral level versus the ethical level. And I guarantee you'll always find moral disagreement, but ethical agreement. Okay, so a recent example. The statue of Robert E. Lee should be taken down. Because why? Well, because that guy is a villain. And the other side says, no, he's a hero. No, he's a villain. No, he's a hero. See, moral disagreement. But can you notice how they're actually agreeing on the ethical level? They both agree that villainy should be condemned and heroism should be praised. You see that? On that level, both sides would agree. That's the law within us that recognizes that. As to who is the villain, who's the hero, that's a different issue, right? That is where it becomes somewhat relative. Or the people who absconded to Canada during the Vietnam draft, right? They're cowards. No, they're brave. No, they're cowards. They're brave. They're cowards because they're scared to go fight for their country. No, they're brave because they stuck it to the man, you know. Moral disagreement. But what's the agreement? Well, bravery is to be praised, cowardice is to be condemned. You see that? That they can agree on. And so, even if you don't use the technical terms, I mean, I've been having discussions with atheists as of these past couple of weeks on this, and man, do they have a hard time because, well, I looked up the definition in the dictionary, and that's not what ethics means. And I don't care. Let's call it level 1 and 2, A and B. It doesn't matter to me what we call them. I'm just saying recognize those differences, those levels. And you'll see that there's disagreement on one, but agreement on the other one. Now, to the problem of evil, I once approached my pastor and said, hey, I want to give a talk on the problems of evils, and I'm not lisping. Because there's more than one problem, and there's more than one evil. For example, the evil of a Hitler is different from the evil of a tsunami, right? I mean, that's just very basic and obvious. And well, I once presented a 2.5-hour marathon nonstop lecture on the problem of evil, and I probably cut a half hour out of my notes. So I thought, well, why even, I mean, I got, 5 minutes? Why even bring this up at all? So I decided to mainly tell you 2 personal anecdotes that really put things into perspective for me. because I definitely learned a lot more theology just becoming a dad than I have any other possible way. But let me point out that there's different evils, well, there's different problems too. And the most important problem of evil to deal with is the emotional problem of evil. Because, for instance, and I've heard this happen, the atheist gets up during the debate and he's talking to the crowd about horrible things that happen to women and children and death and war and this and that and the other. And you can't help but get emotional about it. And the fact is, when somebody causes you to feel an emotion, you make a bond with them, okay? For good, bad, or ugly, either way. However they make you feel, there is a bond that forms. And somebody doesn't have to know how to logically think through issues in order to feel an emotion. It's there, and it's a real thing. You're literally feeling it. So then here comes the Christian to the next step of the debate to refute it, and throws out some kind of abstract, logical, theological, philosophical concepts that just seem so black and white and abstract. And how do you compare that with something I actually tangibly felt? You see that the problem there is the emotional problem of evil is a very important thing to deal with. And you don't deal with it with snappy answers, because you're dealing with a person who's actually feeling it. Then there's the logical problem of evil, which results in that if God has sufficient reason for allowing evil, then it's justified. Okay, how do you like that? That actually is logically viable, but you see what I mean? If you've just been experiencing emotions about all these horrible things that happen, and I come up and how do you like this answer? It is logically viable, but how do you compare them? That's the problem. That's the problem. And then, of course, there's a theological problem of evil. And that's what I'm going to tell you, my anecdotes. So, when my oldest boy was 5, we were walking around the front yard, and he stepped on a goat head. Okay, not the head of a goat, you know what I mean, the little thorny stickers. And at 5 years old, he said, "Ow, goat heads hurt. Why did God make goat heads?" Okay, and I was thrilled, because I wouldn't have to put him all the way through college till he could finally take philosophy, and his professor would confront him with the problem of evil, right? What I'm saying is that at that moment, as a Jewish dad, I realized how much money I'd saved. I'm in the front yard, if I were a rich man, yabba, 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 yabba. So. And Tevye says the best reason for being a rich man would be he'd have more time to study Torah. And so while I told him, well, look, you're complaining about evil and why did God do this? Because you're taking that pain personally, because it hurts you. But what's going on here? Well, this plant produces a seed with thorns sticking out of it, so if an animal or human walks by, it sticks to them, and then it falls off somewhere away from the mother plant, so these plants can grow and not have to fight for resources, and so it's really good for the plant. But you're taking it personally because it hurt you, right? So that's a different perspective on this pain that is being caused to me, and I'm taking it so personally. And we're recognizing there's other things going on, right? Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Oh, so there's an entire universe going on out there, outside of my pain and beyond it. Wow. Talk about perspective. The other thing was the birth of my youngest boy. Okay, my wife was in labor 25, 27 hours, and as a guy, a problem-solving guy, I couldn't do anything, and that bothered me so much. I mean, I could try to comfort her, but anyhow. So it turns out they had to go in and get him, and I'm by my wife's head, and thank God they put a little partition, because I keep a list of things I could die without knowing, and that was definitely one of them. And the doctor called me, and I looked, and they pulled him out, and he was white as snow and peppered with crimson dots of blood, and anyhow, it turned out the umbilical cord had kind of been wrapped up, so that's why he couldn't move around too much. But he was fine, all right? And so I go in the nursery, and he's just absolutely beautiful. I mean, just... Anyhow, and I know I'm a weirdo, but as I'm looking at my beautiful newborn baby, I was thinking about the problem of evil. That's what I was thinking about. And then here comes the nurse, and she says, oh, I have to take his blood sugar test. And she's approaching him with this surgically sharpened steel and pokes it at his foot. And since I've been thinking about the problem of evil, I made sure I'm looking right dead into his face as she's doing that. And he goes from being in perfect peace, perfect newborn peace, to his face turning red and just yelling out in pain. Okay. And well, that really put things into perspective for me, because I'm thinking, well, I could have stopped her. I could have stopped her legally. I could have stopped her physically. But I didn't. So why did I allow this pain, this suffering, this evil? Why did I, for all intents and purposes, his omnipotent Father, why did I allow it? Well, because I knew better. I knew there was a sufficient reason for allowing that to happen. Right? And when he was 1.5, I actually explained all this to him as a test, just so I could mention it in a lecture. And he kind of wiggled and walked away because he's 1.5. He had no way of understanding anything I was saying to him. And so maybe someday I'll explain it to him and he'll actually be able to understand it. But, when we cry out to God and why, you're 1.5, all right? When I presented that 2.5-hour lecture, a dear sister of ours had died of cancer 2 years after her sister died of cancer. And so her mom was left alone. And so when I talk about the problem of evil, I mean, obviously, it's a very, very, very serious thing and a very, very real thing. But the point is that there's more to it than our perception of it or how we feel about it. There's a greater purpose to it. And in fact, I wasn't going to talk about this, but my dear sister I just met made me discuss something. I thought, okay, I got to mention it during the lecture. Which is the way I as a Jew came to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. One of the main things that happened in my life was that the problem of evil is what brought me to Jesus. So the example I gave to her is the man that performed my sister's wedding. I had maybe 10 minutes to talk to him, with my mom. Say, come on, let's go to the reception, let's go. I'm like, come on. And he was Jewish, nominal. He said he had some interest in Buddhism, whatever. So I got to go. Let me tell you this. If there is no God, or if God is not a personal being, then all the suffering our people have gone throughout the millennia was for nothing, guaranteed. It's that simple. So all the evils that have ever happened, if there is no ultimate Redeemer, then it was for nothing. Literally for nothing. But, that's, from my point of view, for nothing, right? Because what happens with atheism is that evil becomes good. Okay, so I say it was for nothing. They would say, well, no, it's for the betterment of evolution, right? All the horrible, terrible things, all the death and suffering, rid us of the weak, preserve the more fit. And so there's this total changeover of what is evil. Well, anymore, evil is good. And so let's say that I'm really concerned about the problem of evil, so I decide I'm going to reject God and I become an atheist. Well, I'm going to look around the world and notice, well, nothing's changed, right? The problem of evil is a problem for atheists also. And so nothing's changed, and now I don't even have God to blame for it anymore. And so that's what happens with an atheism, is it ends up guaranteeing that since there is no transcendence, no transcendent judge, then the evildoer gets to enjoy their evil doing, and they get away with it. That's what atheism does for you. Maybe they're caught by the legal systems of this world and punished in some way, but ultimately they get away with it. Because also you're assuming that legal systems of the world would think it's evil. I mean, Hitler had his own legal systems, didn't he? So in atheism, evil becomes good, and it doesn't do anything about it, and it guarantees the evildoer gets away with it. So really, the problem of evil is one of the very best reasons for rejecting atheism. So now to science. And there's this basic talking point about science. You see, science keeps taking over God's jobs. He was a God of the fields, and then we lived in the fields and God wasn't there. So he's a God of the hills now, and then we started exploring the hills. Now he's a God of the mountains, and we explored the mountains. Now he's a God of the sky, and we explored the sky. He's not there. He's out in space. Well, ultimately, God has to be transcendent beyond time and space, outside the universe, because science is learning where he's not. And of course, that's all anachronistic. That's just not the reality of science or theology, but that's what people are being told. And so when I'm referring to science, specifically the scientific method, so I'm not just talking about curiosity or even just merely talking about experimentation, but the rigors of the scientific method, which were designed to explore the material realm, right? So if it was designed on the premise that a rational God had created a rational creation and populated it with rational creatures who could therefore rationally discern it. You see, we're back to the issue of whether the brain is at all reliable. In our point of view, it is. It was specifically designed to ascertain truth, which is knowable. But science is a tool, and it's a tool for a certain job. And so I wouldn't use a telescope, survey the heavens, and say, oh, there's no such thing as cells. I don't see them. And I wouldn't use a microscope and say, oh, well, there's no such thing as planets. I'm not seeing them. I mean, you have different tools for different jobs. And if science is for exploring the material realm, well, then how could you claim to conclude from it that there is no immaterial realm? Right? And so atheists, one memo they've definitely gotten is use the word science as much as possible. I mean, I get it all the time. In fact, the atheist I debated up in Canada, he had the first opening statement, and he said something like, right up front, first thing, debates on the issue of morality are usually handled on a philosophical level, but I'm going to deal with it as a scientific issue. I'm going to give you scientific evidence. And I thought, oh, bravo, my dear sir, bravo. Because he knew that key word, right? He knew that if he said science, it would lend authority to anything he would say after that. And I thought that was a brilliant stroke on his part. Although the fact is atheism has absolutely nothing to do with science, and science has absolutely nothing to do with atheism. In fact, we had an atheist just this past week tell me, well, if science can't explore the non-material realm, then why do you believe in it? Okay, because I don't adhere to scientism. Okay, and there's a vast difference between science and scientism. Scientism is what would tell you if science can't explore it, then it doesn't exist. Something you can't prove scientifically, by the way. Now, note that Stephen Hawking said, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Okay. Now, first of all, in order to create yourself, you would have to pre-exist your own existence, right? You would have to already exist to create yourself, and so it's just this logical loop. doesn't work. Okay, in other words, he may be good at science, he's not very good at logic. All right. And then, because there is a law, such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. So the law, such as gravity, pre-exists the universe, on his view. Okay, well, where? And then from nothing, of course, because nowadays nothing is being redefined. So, but you know what I really think? I think Stephen Hawking found God. He's calling it a law, but he found God. And so I'm sure most of you would recognize the phrase, Bereshit bara Elohim hashemayim ve'et ha'eretz, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning time, God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. There you go, Genesis 1:1. You already got the basic makeup of the universe as a time, space, matter continuum. And it says in the beginning, God created these. So God was already there before the universe. So he transcends it. He's outside of or beyond it. And that's exactly what Hawkins was getting at in a very clumsy way. Is he's calling it a law, but it pre-existed the universe, and it caused it to come about. So he found God, he just doesn't recognize it because he's so beholden to an atheist worldview. Now, the historian of science and evolutionary biology and popular genetics, William B. Provine, said, "Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear." And these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. That'll be the end of me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, no free will for humans either. What an unintelligible idea. Now, did you note his premise? It is modern evolutionary biology tells us, well, modern evolutionary biology tells us nothing because it is not a being. It has no mind, right? It is modern evolutionary biologists who tell us things. You see what I mean? It's the human being doing that work that tells us things. This is called the personification fallacy in logic. Biology doesn't tell us anything. Biologists tell us things. And so then you get into issues of bias and all that. But what on earth makes them think that modern evolutionary biology has anything whatsoever to say about God's purposes, forces, life and death, ethics, meaning of life, free will? I thought biology was the study of living organisms. I mean, that's what I thought. What on earth does that have to do with the topics he's claiming that it covers? You see? It's basically, the thing is, biology is a science, okay? But evolution is a philosophy. And some people turn it into a worldview. So now through this worldview, he's examining living organisms and he thinks that it's going to tell us something that covers everything in the world. God's purposes, ethics, everything. Wrong tool for the wrong job. That is not what biology was meant to do. And someone has pointed out that science cannot define evil. So there's another job it can't do. So we're back to scientism and not science. Lastly, let's talk about atheism itself. With the atheist Jeffrey J. Lauder stating that the atheist movement keeps shooting itself in the foot by failing to reach a consensus regarding the meaning of atheism. And I've been dealing with atheists online since, I think, 2009. And let me tell you, it is an ongoing debate. And inevitably you will have to debate that. What does the word mean? It's unbelievable, but it happens all the time. And part of the problem is that there's academic definitions, but there's pop definitions, right? And so, personally, I like going back to Thomas Henry Huxley, because in 1869, he coined the term agnosticism, because he was saying, well, atheists are positively affirming God's non-existence, theists are positively affirming God's existence. I can't make a commitment to either extreme, so I want a middle position, and I want that to mean something that I don't have enough knowledge to go either way, so that's agnostic, right? And so, would it make sense if I called myself a Christian atheist? No. Not at all, okay. 2,000 years ago, would it have made sense for me to call myself a Christian atheist?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. 2,000 years ago, Christians were called atheists because they didn't believe in the Roman or Greek gods. Right? And that just goes to show you words have definitions that change throughout time and usage. So that made sense back then. It wouldn't make sense with our current usage of the term, and it's changing even as we speak. I mean, dictionaries change for a reason, because when the word usage changes, so does the official definitions. And so what we end up with is, for example, like I said, the popular level definitions and the academic definitions can differ, and inevitably an atheist will tell me, well, atheism means this, and they'll give me some definition, and I don't even care what it is. The first thing I ask them is, well, who gave you the authority to define atheism and define it for all atheists? Well, I looked up the definition, and yeah, I know. You typed in atheism definition, and you read the first thing that popped up, and I find I have to remind people that IE, that refers to Internet Explorer, not to Instant Expert, okay? And so I actually put up an article on my website with very many definitions of atheism from dictionaries and encyclopedias, and many of them still include the fact that atheists will positively affirm God's existence. Okay, now that's different from an atheist saying, I don't believe in God. That's different from saying, I believe God does not exist. That's a whole different claim. Is to claim to know, to possess the positive knowledge that God doesn't exist. You see, and the problem for atheists was that when they make that positive affirmation, then they're called to prove it. And it's not good enough to say, no, the burden of proof is on you theists. But if you're the one claiming to know that God doesn't exist, your claim to truth is right on the same level as mine. And atheists got tired of the fact that they couldn't prove it, so they have this fallback definition of atheism merely means a lack of belief in God. So that way they don't have to prove anything. And that's more like the popular level definition. So that, where is it? Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. So now the positive affirmation of God's non-existence, that's the traditional position of atheism, and that is known as strong atheism or positive atheism or explicit atheism or critical atheism. For instance, Dan Barker from the Freedom of Religion Foundation, in his debate against Dinesh D'Souza, he states, when it comes to the Christian God, the God of the Bible, I am a capital A, positive atheist. Not only do I say that God does not exist, that God cannot exist, I'm proud to say that I possess not only a belief, but a knowledge that that God does not exist. The Christian God cannot and does not exist. Other gods may or may not. On the other hand, there is what is known as weak atheism or negative atheism or implicit atheism. And that would be more the person who says, I don't believe in God because his existence has not been proven yet and it may or may not in the future. That's basically an agnostic point of view, really. And I find that a lot of atheists are agnostic, but for whatever reason, I think the term atheist has a lot more cachet, I guess, so they go by that term. Now, as for the lack of belief usage, I'm going to read a statement by the atheist Chris Thebe, who is an atheist talking about atheists. And to read this quote word for word, I'm going to step down there because I consider the place where God's word is preached to be sacred ground. And I'll feel more comfortable reading this one down here. The lack of public acceptance of the lack of belief definition of atheism is reflected in the fact that no reputable dictionary has a lack of belief definition for either atheism or atheist. However, this has not kept a few morons from incorrectly claiming that various dictionary definitions have a lack of belief definition. I have posted some of the arguments these people use, and I explain why they are so damn stupid. Okay. And we're back. The thing is, he wrote that quite a few years ago, and it goes to show how things change, because nowadays you will find the lack of belief definition in at least level 1 or 2 or 3 of any given dictionary. So it just goes to show. Now, Michael Shermer, famous editor of Skeptic magazine, he draws a distinction between the atheist who claims there is no God and the non-theist who claims to have no belief in God. And then you run into all sorts of terminology, such as people who call themselves naturalist or materialist or reductionist or rationalist, skeptics, brights, freethinkers, ethical culturalists. And one of my favorites is humanists, because I found that inevitably humanist organizations support abortion. And I'm thinking, how could you call yourself a humanist when you believe in murdering innocent and defenseless humans? It just shows you the cognitive dissonance. Christopher Hitchens liked to use the term anti-theist. Bill Maher prefers ap-atheist, because he says, I'm just apathetic about the issue of God's existence. You know, coming from a guy who has built a significant portion of his career on dealing with that issue, of course, by the way. Dan Barker stated that free thinkers include atheists, agnostics, and rationalists, whereas American Atheist Webmaster wrote, atheists are not secular humanists, free thinkers, rationalists, or ethical culturalists. Often people who are atheists find it useful to masquerade behind such labels. Then Sam Harris dislikes the term atheist, and American Atheists took him to task on that because they said it has been a hard-fought war to make that acceptable. On the Pulse TV show, 2002, Michael Newdow, you might recognize the name, he's the one that sued the government to get In God We Trust off of the money. He told Bill O'Reilly that he believes that atheism is a religion. Okay, so there's another example of an atheist with a very different view on atheism. Unfortunately, as a reply, O'Reilly quoted a dictionary and said, oh no, that doesn't fit, it's not a religion. I thought, oh, that's a missed opportunity, because I would have said, you're right, it is a religion, and why are you trying to shove it down our throats? Right? But this goes to the point that there's different kinds of definitions, right? There's dictionary definitions, which are grammatical definitions. There's etymological dictionaries. There's philosophical dictionaries. There's even medical dictionaries. There's all kinds of definitions, and I often find I have to tell people, look, don't bring a grammatical definition into a theological discussion or a philosophical discussion, because what a word means grammatically isn't necessarily relevant to the context of our discussion. And that's another reason why it's very important to define our terms. Okay. Another issue is that I often refer to the atheist worldview, and atheists constantly give me grief on that. So I ask them, well, fine, because they say atheism is just one point of view, one position, one opinion on one issue. That's it. So it's not a worldview. I said, well, fine. Tell me, in what part of your thinking about anything and everything, aesthetics, anthropology, cosmology, mathematics, I don't care what, everything. In what part of your thinking do you make provision for an actually existing God? Inevitably, the answer is in no part. I said, well, there you go. You got yourself a worldview. Because that one position about that one issue branched out into how you view absolutely everything else, so that it is a worldview. See that? Were you telling me to stop, or were you giving me a countdown?
We need to start questions soon.
Okay, okay.
So go ahead and finish. Find a good spot.
I'm right about done. Bottom line is, from my experience, primarily atheism is an anti-Christian support group. Okay? And studies show that atheism is primarily a young, white, male phenomenon. Okay? As a research project, I read the reasons over 100 atheists gave for why they became atheists, and definitely noticed some patterns. For example, they love to boast about just how early in life they became atheists. Teens and preferably preteens, because the earlier the better. Which to me, when they say that, I hear, oh, okay, so you didn't become an atheist because of logical reasons, or theological reasons, or moral reasons, or scientific reasons. You just became an atheist, most likely because you were rebelling against mommy and daddy. That's just bottom line this thing. And also some bad experiences with really rigid religious people, which is too bad. But that's why you hear them talk about God in terms of being an invisible friend, or a sky daddy, or likening God to Santa Claus, because their theology literally remained at that childish level, because they rejected God for childish reasons, and they rejected a childish notion of God that then never developed. So that they do have this very childish view of God. The professor of psychology, Paul Vitz, did a study of the lives of the world's most well-known atheists, and inevitably, each and every one of them had some kind of conflict with their own dads. Okay, either the dad had died when the child was young, or was abusive or absentee, or whatever it was. They always had that kind of issue. So Vitz turned around this Freudian claim and said, Freud said, man invented God as sort of a father figure to feel comfortable about, and Paul Vitz said, oh, well, see, these atheists had a problem with their own earthly dads, so they took it out on the ultimate dad, God. The other thing is that I've noticed atheism is neo-pagan. Okay, pagan basically being earth worship or nature worship. And that's when I realized, oh, no wonder they're constantly going on about science and evolution, because to them, evolution is their creator. And so they replace awe in God with awe in science. And I think some of you might know where I'm going with this when I'm going to read this from Romans 1. Then I'm going to read a quote from Chesterton, and then we'll be done, John. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it to them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Okay, here's the neo-pagan part. Because that, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made to corruptible men, and birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And even as they did not like to retain their God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind. Okay. So when it comes to nature, I noticed atheists reject an omnipotent, omnipresent, personal administrator of the universe, who is God, but they accept an omnipotent and omnipresent, impersonal administrator of the universe, the laws of thermodynamics, or the laws of logic, I mean physics, or the laws of nature, right? They still admit that there is something running the universe, and it has laws that are unbreakable, but it's like Stephen Hawking, right? They call them laws, or they accept that, but they don't accept the personal God, because of course then you're accountable to God. So lastly, I'm going to read a lengthy quote from G.K. Chesterton, who as usual hits it on the nose, from his 1908 book, Orthodoxy. He states, "The new rebel is a skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never really be a revolutionist. And the fact he doubts everything really gets in the way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. Thus, he writes a book complaining that imperial oppression insults the purity of women, and then writes a book about the sex problem in which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, and then curses Mrs. Grundy because they keep it. As a politician, he will cry out that war is a waste of life, and then, as a philosopher, that all life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce the policeman for killing a peasant, and then prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. A man denounces marriage as a lie, and then denounces aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. He calls a flag a bauble, and then blames the oppressors of Poland or Ireland because they take away that bauble. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. Therefore, the modern man in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything." Okay, I know I ran a little late, and I apologize if we have questions. We have time for questions, but I don't have time for answers. So.
Well, we take a couple questions, and then, of course, tomorrow we've got that additional time. Any questions for?
I do have one.
Yes.
You mentioned debating with atheists. How do you plan a meaningful debate where you're talking to someone when the things that you cite as evidence and things of importance are often completely irrelevant, and the things that he or she cites are irrelevant to your argument? It's hard for me to understand how you connect those dots and have any effect.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of the Socratic method. I mean, okay, being a Jew, I prefer the term rabbinic method, where basically that's the point is what I started with tonight, which is getting underneath it all, so that I don't get stuck in where they want me to function, right? I'm going to get beneath that. So to give you an example, you notice I didn't have a section when lecturing on atheism about the issue of God's existence, right? Because if I thought that was really what atheism is about, I would mention it. But that's at least secondary to atheism. Because if there's no absolute truth, no morality, ethics, so no reason for me to be truthful, if evil is really good, if science doesn't really result in what we... I mean, what's the point of even getting to the issue of God, which is way down the line from any of that? So, for instance, when they ask me about evidence for God's existence, I don't jump right into, here's all my evidences, because they've been trained to think, well, as an atheist, I just have to sit back and say, no, I don't like that, that doesn't count, don't. And it's basically putting us Christians in the defensive position constantly. And they're just batting things away. And so the first thing I ask them is, well, you're asking me for evidence of God's existence? Justify your demand for evidence. Right? That is a very, very bottom line issue, is why do you even think that you get to demand of me that I present evidence to you? And I'm not even talking about the Romans 1 issue, where it's already within that. I'm saying from an atheist perspective, how do you come up with the idea that I'm somehow beholden to justify myself to you?
So basically, you have to read their rule book and beat them at their own semantics.
It's to read into their presuppositions,
Okay.
hidden assumptions, so that in an atheist universe, again, how do you think that whatever I tell you will be properly discerned through your haphazardly evolved brain? I mean, why don't you take that seriously? Or where do you get off holding me to the laws of logic? You mean the nothing exploded for no reason and there came the laws of logic? Where did they come from? Did human beings just invent them along the way? Well, then what do I care? They're arbitrary, right? There's so much to deal with before even... And what I'm saying is when I'm dealing with all these bottom line issues, we barely ever get to discuss what they wanted me to, because they get so frustrated recognizing that they're standing in a bottomless pit, really, of assertion under assertion, 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 assertion. And when I start pointing out, well, these are all assertions, then they see there's no bottom and they get really frustrated, and generally they lash out emotively and they call me all kinds of fancy names, and then they go away. That happens all the time. So that, for instance, if let's say you, as a fellow Christian, said, hey, what about slavery in the Bible? Hey, let's open up the Bible, we'll look up the text, we'll read it for context, historical context, grammatical context, cultural context. If an atheist said, hey, what about slavery in the Bible? You're implying there's something wrong with slavery. What's wrong with slavery? What's wrong with a temporarily and accidentally existing bioorganism enslaving another temporarily and accidentally existing bioorganism? Where do you get your idea that there's something wrong with that? And if there is something wrong with that, how does your atheism help it at all? It's impotent. It doesn't do anything. And the slave owner gets to have his slave and dies and gets away with it. I mean, you see, it's a completely different ballgame.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Yes.
I just wanted to point out, when you were talking about truth, the Romans 1:18 came to mind about men are suppressors of the truth. And so that's essentially what you're arguing anytime you get into that conflict. And then I once had, you were talking about dictionary definitions, I once had a teacher say to me, dictionaries don't tell us what words mean, they tell us how the words are used.
I love it.
And,
Yes.
And I think that's important too.
Yes.
Because that's how they can get redefined
Exactly.
all the time.
Yeah, that was very good. Yes.
I just wanted to know if you could comment on Hillary Clinton. She's called us basically back to the deplorable. A lot of us who believe the way we do, and yet when Billy Graham died, she had only good words to say about him, and Bill Clinton too. So how do you think about things like that?
Well, the first thing I would say about her is I put her in this box of recognizing she's a politician and will say whatever is convenient at any given time. Okay? That's bottom line, step one. And then to think about, Same thing I was just talking to the gentleman about. Okay, so I'm deplorable because of the views I hold. What is wrong with being deplorable? Because see, well, that's what was so telling. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, Chesterton said. That's so insightful, because if she's saying, you're deplorable, okay, well, you're implying that there is something actually, really, and absolutely, truthfully wrong with being deplorable. But based on what? And then you'd have to have her tell you based on what. But then you could question that. And you question that, and you question that, and you question that, until, like I said, they recognize I'm basing all this just on my personal preferences, right, on my emotions, or you see that there's always like this almost infinite regress of reasons. And if you keep chasing them down, then they will either end up admitting something like, well, hey, it's just my opinion, or they will just lash out in anger, as she obviously does. For instance, I'm thinking of a statement made by a certain person from I don't have it before me, but from a university secular group, and he's talking about that the ultimate reason he thinks that what Hitler did is wrong, and I'm not kidding, because I say so. That's what he said. And I thought, that is actually the best possible answer he could have given. Because as an atheist, I love honesty in all its forms. And to read that, wow, that he recognizes, I got nothing else. Because Richard Dawkins, for instance, said whether Hitler was right or wrong, that is genuinely a difficult question. And I'm thinking, well, speak for yourself, But again, the admission, it's so honest. I absolutely love it. That they recognize, well, yeah, Richard Dawkins was asked, is the fact that rape is immoral as arbitrary as that we evolved to have 5 fingers instead of 6? And he said, yeah, you could say that. You see, and again, it's so refreshing to see the void, which is atheism. So yeah, I don't want to comment on politics too much, but that's the way I always think of it, is what is behind that? And then, and what is behind that and behind that? And by the way, just a tip, usually when you ask people what's behind that, they will repeat what they just said, but in different words. So you have to say, well, wait, you just said the same thing, just with different words. So what is really behind that? And what's really behind that? Yes?
I'm trying to think how your arguments here might apply to our current day problem between liberals and conservatives. It seems to me some of your ideas of argumentation might be applicable. We need to know what do we believe, and how do these beliefs clash. I'm trying to wrestle with that.
I'll give you an example. And first of all, you're a retired professor of physics, right?
Excuse me?
You're a retired professor of physics?
Yes.
Well, I don't have to be a physicist to know what matters. I've actually been dying to say that to you. Okay, I'll give you an example, okay? So, we have these discussions about abortion, and we are told how to think about them, which is, it's a woman's rights issue. And so, if you are already getting the sense of how I think about things, I'm not going to go over here yet. I want to find out how I got there. So I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. If a woman doesn't want to have a baby, how did she get pregnant? Or why did she get pregnant? Why don't we ever start at, let's make sure women don't get pregnant when they don't want babies? Why doesn't anybody ever talk about that? Oh, because then you're talking about behaviors, and then you're talking about ethics, and you're talking about things you're not supposed to get involved in, because the woman pragmatism is one thing Mark was talking about. The woman has the right to do it because it's towards her ultimate goal or good, the way she sees it. So again, back them up, back them up, back them up. How is a woman pregnant if she doesn't want to have a baby? Why is she engaging in the action which is historically been known to produce a baby, right? And now be prepared to tell, well, what if they were raped? Which of course is a reductio ad absurdum. It's like 99.9% of abortions have nothing to do with that. So if you want to discuss rape, we can. But let's talk about the 99% first, and then we'll talk about the extreme minority. See, you don't want to get locked into, because that's such an emotional bomb, right? It's just like the emotional problem of evil. What about rape? Oh boy, who could possibly argue then? You know, because everybody gets all hot and bothered. But again, now we're talking strict politics and the issue of abortion. We're always told to have these conversations, which we don't have. We're just told what to think. But let's deal with the issue of rape. Okay, abortion. Okay. How are women who are strong and independent and all of that, who don't want babies, why are they getting pregnant? Let's talk about that. And that is something nobody seems to want to talk about, because that is a cause and effect issue. They want to deal with the effect. I'm saying, well, what's the cause? Let's talk about the cause. You see, it's getting behind it all and underneath it all, to the bottom line again, yeah.